So it's a great pleasure to see my friend Dan Rabinowitz again after some years, and to have had an excellent talk. Of course, you can't hear my voice. Anyway, I'll cut it all out. But Dan, there were two questions really I wanted to ask you. One was about your family background and your relation to Zionism and your feelings about Zionism, and how you came to be where you are now in the academic and social world. So you're great back a few generations.
Well, I would say that on both my parents' side, both my mother and my father, I come from very, very Zionist background. My mother was born in Kiev in the Ukraine to a Polish family who sort of moved backwards and forwards between Kiev, Bialystok, Pinsk, and when she was a little girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, around 1920 or 25, her father, my grandfather, suddenly decided that he became a Zionist. And we're still trying to work out how this happened. But apparently there was a brilliant Zionist narrator who was doing the Polish shtetl tour, came to where they were, and he was convinced. And the next thing the little family knew, that my mother and her elder sister and their mother, was that they were on their way to Palestine. And in 1925 they landed in Haifa. My mother was 7 then. And so, and of course the significant thing is that the rest of the family who stayed behind, my grandfather's siblings and my grandmother's siblings, all died, all were murdered by the Nazis. So in a way I owe my life, my existence, to this type of Zionism. My father was born in South Africa in 1912 and was to a family who had arrived from Lithuania in the 1880s, middle-class family in Jewish Johannesburg. And during his time at university in Witwatersrand, where he took law with Max Gluckman, he decided that he became a Zionist. So in 1935 he joined the South African delegation to the first Maccabi Games, which is more or less equivalent to the Jewish Olympic Games in Palestine, and stayed. And 2 or 3 years later he met my mother. So in both cases, if Zionism hadn't been there, then my father would have probably remained a wealthy lawyer in South Africa for the rest of his life, and my mother would have perished with the rest of her family in Poland in the Second World War. I'm saying that because although these are my, if you like, my Zionist roots, my stance towards Zionism, certainly in the last 15 or 20 years, and certainly through my ethnographic and anthropological upbringing, part of which I owe to this institution, has been very critical of Zionism. So it's an ambivalent and complex relationship I have with Zionism.
Thank you very much. Second question is about your position as an Israeli academic teaching in a Jewish university, and yet having very liberal and understanding views of the Palestinians' predicament. Do you find it very difficult in relation to your colleagues or to the general public or to your students? What are the difficulties?
I wouldn't say that I find it difficult. I know that there have been, moments in my career when I had to pay a price, but it's not been a very exacting price. It's not that what I'm saying or what I'm writing and publishing is deemed as illegitimate in any way. It's radical more than it is liberal in terms of the way I look at the Palestinians. But I think one thing that has helped me is that I'm getting these ideas regularly published as op-ed pieces in Haaretz, which is Israel's Haaretz, which is politically the Israeli equivalent of The Guardian. It's a broadsheet daily newspaper, but that has been around since 1920 and is very liberal in terms of allowing people of all walks of political life to write there, and I write regularly there. And that's a kind of sort of seal of legitimacy from the Israeli mainstream. But it is true that some colleagues in the Israeli academia think that myself and other critical sociologists and anthropologists and historians are a pain in the neck to the national effort, which I'm proud to be.
Thank you. Another question really about your hopes and beliefs about the future of the resolution of this terrible ongoing problem. Do you, perhaps in the light of the recent American elections in which the Democrats have seized control of the House and Senate, have you any hope about that this problem is going to be resolved in the next whatever years?
Have I any hopes for Israel and Palestine? You know, do the people living on the rim of a volcano are they optimists or pessimists? I think you have to be an optimist, and I'm also an optimist by personal persuasion. The last few decades have been worse than our worst nightmares. But I think if I do have any hope, it does come from doing ethnography amongst Palestinians and Arabs generally. And I mean, this has been an avenue for me throughout my adult life to realize how malleable and positive humans can be. I'm not naive enough to project the good experiences that I've had as an ethnographer with Palestinians to politics at large. And that's not the point I'm trying to make. But I am trying to make a point about human life and humanity being there all the time as a very, very powerful beacon. And for me, you know, as someone who's dedicated his professional life to study otherness when the other is Palestinian, it gives you a tremendous amount of courage to believe that, you know, beyond this abyss could be something that is open, that is accepting of each other, that is hopeful. And I think that Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Arabs, can live together. I know it from experience on a micro scale, and that what gives me courage. Otherwise, you know, when reality in Israel and Palestine, especially for somebody who is interested in the Palestinian citizens of Israel, it can be very depressing. But I refuse to succumb.
Very good. Well, a couple of other questions, just small questions. One is, you're sitting grasping Evans Pritchard's cushion there, which, so I was wondering, leads to the question of who among anthropologists work you've read, or anything has most influenced you, do you think, in your career?
Well, I think to begin with, meeting Max Gluckman, who used to come regularly to my parents' home in Haifa, and then sort of rediscovering him as a prolific and published anthropologist has been one type of influence on my life. Levi-Strauss has always been a sense of inspiration in terms of the general width of thought and intellectual, penetrating intellectual abilities. Jack Goody, who, like yourself, mentored me when I was doing my MPhil here, was, I think, a real example in which a person, not only as a intellectual writer, has made an imprint on myself. As did Ernest Gellner, who was my supervisor for my PhD and was extremely forgiving and tolerant for political ideas that took me a while to understand were not at all his cup of tea. And I think this is something that maybe not as an anthropologist, but as an intellectual, I've learned from him without this ever being stated. I mean, this was a story that was instructive because it was never explicit. The way he supervised and the way he was, he allowed people to be themselves without ever needing to actually direct them in any particular direction. I like to think that with some of the supervisions that I do, I employ the same direction. And of course, Evans Pritchard. Evans Pritchard, lethal logic, on witchcraft and on probability and on rationality. His newer stuff is something that I keep, going back to. I admit that another aspect of my professional life has been highly influenced by the critical view of anthropology coming from America in the last 20 years. Clifford, Marcus, Michael Fisher, these are powerful influences on a more reflexive tendency that I have in my anthropology, which is also why my books are often referring to my own experiences and my own biography. I've learned to accept my biography as a legitimate part of my ethnographic inquiry. And I think I'll have to mention Edmund Leach as well.
It's all right, you don't need to be ashamed about it.
I think he did a marvelous thing in translating, transliterating, interpreting Levi-Strauss to the English-speaking anthropological world. And it's not only about language, of course. It's about something which is bigger than that. Levi-Strauss, brilliant as he was and wide and encompassing as he was, needed that kind of intervention. Sometimes in the 60s and 70s to become what he eventually became for non-French speaking anthropologists. And I think that this was brilliantly done and done in a very timely fashion by Edmund Leach.
Is there just any other single thing that you want to put on record? I mean, I hope we'll be able to do this again in 20 years and you'll have other things to say about your whole life's work, but is there anything I should have asked you that you'd like to say?
I think there's a the special quality and resonance to the visual project that you, Alan, have been part of and have been leading here since I remember this department in 1982. I think I'm comforted by it more than anything else. Comforted because I cannot think of a better medium to capture anthropology and capture anthropological insight, even if it's only by interviewing people, than the visual medium. And I think that the tireless efficiency with which you've done it is something that is it's encouraging for me to think that this visual project has been here, is here, will probably go on here. And in my case, it also had an influence on some of the intellectual interests that I've developed as an academic after my years in Cambridge, especially after my PhD in the 90s. So basically, I'd like to thank this Alan Macfarlane Visual Anthropology Record Documentary Project.
Well, that's with 40 seconds to go, and I ought to say that I didn't ask Dan to say that, but thank you very much indeed, Dan.